This is BBC World. Now we bring you personal, in-depth views of an international figure in Profiles.
National emergency procedures.
In 1972, Britain was gripped by industrial unrest.
For a general strike if the men...
Working in an Oxford laboratory at the time was a young biologist who was forced to abandon his research because of the power cuts. He turned to writing instead and began to draft a book that was to kickstart an intellectual revival in evolutionary biology, the study of how life has evolved. The book was The Selfish Gene, the writer Richard Dawkins. It asked a crucial question: where does natural selection act? Is it on species, on groups, on individual animals, or at a more basic level still? It was to prove controversial.
It gave this spine-tingling feeling about how you could suddenly see a pattern in the way animals and human beings behaved that really hung together, and that was really a very exciting new way of looking at the world.
When you're talking about genes as though they had intentions and minds, and were consciously selfish, that could mislead.
I have very little sympathy with that view. I don't think the phrase selfish gene ever confused a biologist. It only confuses philosophers.
But confusing philosophers is exactly what Richard Dawkins seems to do so well. The selfish gene stirred up a hornet's nest of controversy about the meaning of life that's buzzing to this day. And he seems to relish his role as a stirrer, never happier, it seems, than when he's being an evangelist for strict science or putting a bomb under established religion. His latest book carries on that tradition, setting the clever scientific cat among the parish pigeons, and it might almost have been named for him, a devil's chaplain. Today, I'm going to find out if he really does have horns.
The Selfish Gene was written 27 years ago. Interestingly, Dawkins, now an Oxford professor, says it's the least favourite of his books.
Richard.
Hello, come in.
Thanks very much. Good to see you.
Maybe that's because it landed him in so much hot water. People who didn't read beyond the title thought he was suggesting that selfishness among animals, and even among humans, was natural.
I guess it's the word selfish, really, isn't it? Do you ever feel that your work has been misrepresented, that you've been fundamentally misunderstood?
I suppose everybody's work is sometimes misrepresented. I certainly have, almost unbelievably, met the misunderstanding of the selfish gene, that genes are somehow thought to be consciously selfish little entities. People have seriously thought that I must have been saying that DNA molecules actually think it out and work out how to be selfish. The selfish gene is not the same as the selfish individual.
Charles Darwin said that life evolves through natural selection, that life is a perpetual struggle in which only the strongest succeed. The rest die without bearing offspring. Darwin called it the survival of the fittest, and it worried even him, because it suggested that nature was fundamentally brutal. Dawkins' idea was that it wasn't individuals who were selfish so much as their genes. But coming as it did in the emerging greed is good culture that would dominate the 1980s, the selfish gene appeared to bestow a biological blessing on greed and individualism. Ironically, it was actually opening the door to the opposite, altruism.
Dawkins is sometimes associated with selfishness because of the phrase, the selfish gene. In fact, what he was doing was making room in evolution for unselfishness.
The message of the selfish gene is not that humans are selfish or that they ought to be. Rather, it's that genes are selfish. And the consequence of genes being selfish, of course I don't think it out, but the consequence of genes behaving as if they are selfish, self-replicating, self-preserving entities, is that humans, or bats or birds, which are survival machines for those genes, are probably going to be not selfish, or may well be not selfish.
Before Dawkins came along, Darwinism had a problem. If life is a struggle for survival, If we're all just trying to reproduce at everyone else's expense, then why would anyone ever be nice to anyone else, as is often seen among wild animals? Why isn't it all just brutal chaos?
Altruism was a problem that baffled Darwin and baffled scientists really for most of the 20th century, in the sense that if evolution consists of a struggle to survive, then why be nice to someone? Why be nice to your potential competitors? And the gene's eye view transforms this problem, because it enables you to say, well, you may indeed be helping the body of another individual survive, but in doing so you may be helping copies of your own genes survive. And that's what happens if you're nice to close relatives, like social insects are, or indeed like we are when we're nice to our children.
It was actually the great biologist Bill Hamilton who made the breakthrough discovery about altruism in nature. He noticed that many social insects, like ants and termites, will make the ultimate self-sacrifice, will give up their own lives to save the colony. That the colony is made up entirely of siblings, usually sisters, and the siblings are all genetically identical. So even if one dies, her genes will carry on. Indeed, according to this view, the individual animal becomes almost irrelevant to the selfish drive of its genes. Unfortunately, Hamilton's pioneering work was full of impenetrable maths. It lay largely ignored for several years.
It takes a lot of people to make a scientific revolution. You need the people with the bright idea, the breakthrough. You need the experimentalists who go out into the field and collect the data that supports it. In Darwin's case, they sort of both came together in Darwin. But even Darwin needed Thomas Henry Huxley to go out there and hammer home the point and translate it into words that other people could understand. In some ways, Richard Dawkins is the Tom Huxley of the Hamilton Revolution, if you like. History will, I think, record that his great significance was to spell out the implications of what people like Hamilton were saying, and perhaps even to Hamilton himself spell out the implications of what he was saying.
The main thrust was the idea that animals share genes with their relatives. So if I do something for my brother, let's say, then the genes that cause me to do it will survive in him. And so there is essentially a gene-centered process going on. Hamilton didn't say anything as simple as that, but that's really the essential idea.
Dawkins' real achievement was to make Bill Hamilton's work understandable to the general public. But in science, every solution poses new problems. Selfish genes may explain why one individual will make a sacrifice for a relative who shares its genes, but it doesn't explain selfless behavior beyond that intimate circle. Are animals only prepared to make sacrifices for the sake of near relatives? Humans are animals too, says biology, and in human society we see plenty of self-sacrifice for the sake of complete strangers. Firemen will even give up their lives for someone they've never met. So, are humans an exception to the idea of selfish genes?
I think when applied to, well, for example, trying to understand altruism in bees and wasps and ants and so on, why do worker bees sacrifice themselves for the hive?